Welcome to Built Together, the podcast where design, technology, and leadership meet to shape the spaces where we work, learn, and connect in. In every episode, you'll hear from architects, engineers, technologists, and innovators who are breaking down the silos and rethinking how we create spaces that truly bring people together. Because great spaces aren't just about the plans or the tech, they're about the people. And it's what's possible when we build together. Thank you, and welcome to Build Together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Built Together podcast. I am your host, Xzavia Killer Kelly. As you know, this is a podcast we explore technology and design and how all of those things come together. Joining me today is someone that I deeply respect in this industry. Some of you may know who he is already. And for those who don't know, Mark Coxon is the Director of Market Development at AVI-SPL XTG, one of the world leaders in workplace collaboration and AV design, build, and integration solutions. And we are so happy to have you on board here. You know, Mark is known in our industry as a sharp thinker, as someone who is really great at telling stories and bringing this AV industry of ours into a new light with the way that he tells stories. So Mark, thank you for joining us, man. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to be here. You built me up too much. Now I have performance anxiety. We've got this, and you've got this trophy case behind you here. You've got some awards going on back behind your head there. I need to upgrade my background besides some blinds and plants. So.
Look, I will give credit to my wife where credit is due. I think if I were to say this was my idea, I would be unjustly taking the credit from my wife. I told her, hey, we're going to be doing the podcast at home. We have a studio, but those episodes at home, she was like, you know what? If you're going to do it, let's make it look nice. So
nice.
This is all
Love
her.
Love it.
This is all her. But yeah, so I appreciate that. Appreciate you. And some of the things that I want to talk about today, you're doing something that I think is really interesting, and it just says a lot about you and the courage you have within this industry. But you are writing a book in public, and one, I think that's super cool. And for those of you who would like to read that book in public, make sure to check out Mark Coxon's Substack. That's where you can find it. You've written a few different pieces, and I want to just talk one about the idea. Like, how did this idea come to bear? Like, what brought you to this point to say, hey, you know what? I want to start writing about these things.
You know what? It's been a long process. So, I think I first considered writing a long form, either ebook or book or field guide or pocket manual, probably in 2018, 2019 was the first time it really crossed my mind to do something more long form. I've written for a long time for Commercial Integrator and Rave, and before that CE Pro, and some of our industry magazines, and I've been writing for them pretty consistently since 2011. So 14 years of writing under my belt. So had a lot of experience in writing short form blog style content. Had a lot of ideas, especially when I went in. I think 2018 was a pivotal year for me. I went into running technology at a workplace design firm, like a high-end furniture dealer that focused a lot on architects and designers and things like that. And so how do I translate this techie kind of geeky world of AV into something that these folks that really care about fit and finish and the final product, how do I translate that into a language that they understand? And that was when the first kind of ideas of a book came about. What was interesting was then COVID hit. And then the conversation shifted towards remote work. And it's like, oh, wow, how many cool things could we learn from this change in behavior that needed to happen when we all of a sudden had to do a new paradigm, how we had to enter a new paradigm of work. And then that started to fade, and that conversation was going out. And then we're working on workplace experience and experiential. Now we're working through this thing of AI. How many things could be possible in this new world of AI-enabled technology, et cetera. And what I really came to realize is that every single one of these pivot points, me trying to explain something technical to a non-technical person, the paradigm shift of work being not a place, but a thing you do between places, this paradigm of work changing from the old industrial revolution kind of way of working in silos to now being able to use AI to bridge, subject matter and being able to work in a different way. They all had something, in common, and that was that all of these pivots have to be done by people, and it's hard to get people to pivot. We all have our own energy, we have our own habits, we have our own motivations, and those things don't change as quickly as the world around us. And so when I was thinking about doing this book in public on Substack, two reasons I did it in public. One is I want the feedback. It gives me the opportunity to get some kind of real time editing, feedback, what landed, what didn't. And then the final product can actually, almost like a test audience, have some of that built into it, which I think will make a stronger piece of literature afterwards. The second reason is that it's really hard for me to just sit down in a room and do something for 6 months straight, and being able to kind of serialize it in a weekly release allows me to get the work done because it
Sure.
gives me my own inertia, my own habits. I don't do well with long-term projects that don't have short-term goalposts. So if I
Mm,
can set short-term goalposts, I know I can write 300 pages over 6 months, but I can't write it without having those individual kind of deadlines and dates. And
of
so
course.
I use my own knowledge of myself, kind of my own knowledge of my work habits, my workflows, et cetera, and then reverse engineered that to create, a way to do this on Substack every single week. So, anyways, it's been fun and rewarding, and I'm excited about the product as it starts to develop. And yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, and you should be proud. You should be proud because you set a goal and you're doing it, and it's something that's active. And in how you're doing it, it's you're almost being very vulnerable, not only to the industry at large, right, but to whoever decides to take a look at it. But I think that where where this fascinates me is your tie to working with furniture, architecture, and design firms, and then also having the technical aptitude in AV. I feel like that's such a huge gap, and the way that architects and designers think about space, workplace, and the way that we've almost been taught in AV, they really don't align, and they should. And you utilize the physics a lot in your Substack, and it's so relevant because one of the kind of key topics that you push on is inertia, and I love the way that you speak about inertia. I think that one, I mean, yeah, I've never thought that I would read a Substack about AV or about design that utilize Newton's law, right? But but you found a way to do that, which is awesome. But you say that, like in Newton's law, it's like no, an object at rest stays at rest. And then an object in motion continues in motion in a straight line unless acted upon by force. And when I think about workplace and I think about, designers and I think about AV folks, I think that inertia of culture and the inertia of legacy are two of the primary reasons that design thinking doesn't shift and change as the industry shifts and change, at least in some places, right? Because a lot of folks have like a way that they are so used to doing things, a process that they use uh, to evaluate products, and ultimately, certain products may not even end up in their purview because of how organizations are built and like their process. And so, you've mentioned like companies like don't resist change because of technology; they resist it because of culture. And can you speak a little bit of what that means, to in your from your perspective, having been on both sides? Like, where do you see the biggest challenges?
So I see the biggest challenge is this, and I would say, as forward thinking as architecture firms are, and the beautiful products that they make, I think we all miss on one level in that we're part of what we see as a construction project. And the goal of a construction project is to deliver a building or to deliver a room or to deliver a piece of technology, whatever our scope of work within that project is. And we break this project down into scopes of work. We have delivery dates, we sign off. Um, the perspective that we really have to take, though, is that our customer who buys a building or a piece of technology, et cetera, When they receive that finished product at the end of a construction project, it has absolutely zero value until they use it to produce the work that they hoped to achieve, right? So we can go through these design exercises, design something new and compelling and something beautiful, do all of these things, deliver it on time, on budget, for the money. But if we don't take care of the change management that's needed with the people that are actually going to have to use this new tool in a different way to extract new value for the business, then it all falls flat, right? So, the biggest challenge is getting ahead of the curve, and in that, and especially for subcontractors in a process, in AV, we're often brought in late, right? We're brought in
Yeah,
towards the
for
end of the
sure.
process. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is that technology changes rapidly, and you don't want to make technology decisions 2 years ahead of where the product might be. So I don't completely blame anyone within the cycle. But it's just a fact that it often comes in late. And we often don't have a lot of access to the people or the problem that the project is supposed to solve. So what happens is, an architect goes through a programming phase. Their programming phase is, what are you trying to do and how are you trying to do it and who works here and what are your goals, right? Programming is the first stage in something like architecture, but we have very little visibility into that stage. That gets boiled down into reflected ceiling plans, and then maybe a consultant does a drawing for some technology, and the people that are delivering the technology don't really have that full lens of what they're trying to deliver from a solution standpoint, from an outcome standpoint. And so the biggest challenge is changing our mindset to everyone in the process, changing the mindset to what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve with spending this money and building this space. And then once we understand what that outcome is, then we have to learn what are the people doing now, right?
Right.
Um, and then these are the people that have to accomplish this outcome. And then how do we design something that actually moves them towards that goal? And so you have
Sure.
these things. And when I talk about inertia, um, we talk about nature versus nurture or intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, like outside forces versus your own motivations, those type of things. They're always in this push and pull between. So yes, I can create an environment that will tilt people towards a result, right? If I understand where their motion already is and I know how to then coerce that a little bit. Now, the other thing is number one, I can't create like a stop and go. And I don't want to kill momentum and try to create new direction. Like people resist that. Um, you also can't tilt it too much. It's almost like, people are a pinball machine in a way. This is me going back to analogies, right? So people are a pinball machine, right? Like you're playing pinball and you want the ball to go up into the ramp and hit the 5,000 points. If you tilt the machine too much, an alarm goes off and the flippers quit working, right?
Sure.
People don't like to be manipulated. So you can do things for their benefit, for the company's benefit, if you are transparent and communicating why the system is the way it is and telling them how the new system is going to help them do this new thing. But if you try to do it from a manipulation standpoint in the dark, people will feel manipulated and shut off, right? And won't embrace the new thing. So there's always this piece where you have to include people in the desired outcome, communicate why things are going to change in a different way, communicate how those things are actually going to help them develop, do better work, progress within a company. It's going to meet some of their non-business goals, their aspirational goals, their values, et cetera. And then you can use a space to do what you want to do. So for me, those are the biggest challenges. And anytime that you have to, I guess, interpret something physical, and create an objective plan through the soft, squishy, subjective matter of human beings, it gets difficult. So,
I can imagine. I think that one of the ways that you kind of spoke about it in your Substack was the design thinking exercise that you did with the different word clouds and stuff like that. And I feel like organizations and individuals who take that step to include people in the process in a way where one, you're not afraid to give your thought process, but you give the organization and the individuals who are kind of, running the ship some insight into who you are. I think a lot of the problem or a lot of the challenges getting to know your people. And speaking of getting to know your people, being able to name those, bad habits out loud, or those habits out loud that are like, hey, this is really causing some issues as we try to navigate change. Is there something that could be done about it? But finding, I guess, a nice way to do that. I think like when I was in the design consulting, and I was the individual who wasn't supremely technical, but I had ideas in my creative process, brought things together in a way that I felt like, hey, you know what? Have we thought about looking at it like this? And simply because I don't know if it was, the organization wasn't used to people coming with those types of ideas in that way, or if it was just, where I don't know where that stop, where that blockage was, but because it was so different, it was like, well, no, that's not how we come up with solutions. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I found that like in those moments, listening to your people, getting to know who your people are, and then including some of those things in the process help with change, especially if it's coming from, in my opinion, like people from a younger generation that are realizing what's happening on the ground in real time, and they're interacting with people that are coming up next, right? I don't think
Yeah.
a lot of people think about the future in that way. Like when you think about like sustainability by what's it defined as, like part of that sustaining, a moving organization is taking heed from the people who are going to be the ones that are either running your company in the future, or that are going to be on the other side of your partner making those decisions. And it's yeah, it's interesting. And speaking of like people and designing organizations for people, and designing change, I think that it all kind of ties back to what we do in AV, or in the AV space, as it pertains to design. And one of the really cool ways that you talked about design in your Substack, I'm gonna hold this up.
You were
I'm gonna
prepared.
hold it. I was prepared. I was like, if there is anything that I do in this podcast today, I'm gonna speak about your Snickers bar analogy, because it was profound. Now, and I'm not a sweets guy. Like I don't really eat candy. So when my wife comes home later and she sees this, she's gonna have questions. But I literally went out and got this because I was like, this is such a really cool way to look at design. But for those who don't know about your Snickers analogy, can you go into a little bit about, what your Snickers process is all about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For 100%. So again, in my attempt to level set on things that most people understand, um, food is one of those things that has been a great, I guess, medium for me to use to talk about things. And I have an AV as food series that I've put out on LinkedIn, and they've been some of my most popular videos. They're 3-4 minutes with me talking about different technologies as food. And
Nice.
so as I was going through that, what I realized, I was thinking about workplace design, and I had often used this analogy of, or had in presentations brought up a reflected ceiling plan of a building, and showed a conference room and said, in this room where you've got 4 chairs and a table, where does the display go? Display goes here. Okay. The table, where's it go? It goes up against the wall. These 4 chairs are here. Great. Where does the camera go? It goes under the screen. And I said, what do these people do? I don't know. So many times we start to design based on a reflected ceiling plan, an electrical plan, the number of chairs in a space, and we have no idea what the actual people in the room are doing during that meeting or during that task. And those things matter a lot. Um, and their familiarity with different tools matters on what kind of technology or what type of interfaces, et cetera, need to be in that room in order for them to use the things that are in there, right? So you have these two things that are there. What is the work and what is the workflow around that? So the Snickers bar tie-in is this: is that I was watching an episode of Unwrapped with Mark Summers. I don't know if you remember this show, but they tell you how all these foods are made, right? They'll do Twinkies, or they'll do Snickers bars and things like that. So The Snickers bar workplace. So the way you make a Snickers bar is you start with the peanuts. So the peanuts are your people. That's with all of their habits and inertia and all of those things. And then you roll those peanuts around, roast them, and then you mix them with caramel. And caramel is the workflows. So all the workflows that you're using within your business. And then those peanuts and caramel are laid over a platform of the nougat. So the nougat is your platforms, which is your teams, your tools, your software stacks, your technology stacks, whatever those happen to be from a platform perspective. And then after you've done those two things, then you can actually wrap that in chocolate. And the chocolate is the actual facility, the physical space that contains the people, the workflows, and the platforms that they're using. However, many times, most of the time, as I was talking about in the reflected ceiling plan example, what we do is we start with the chocolate. Hey, I have this shell,
Right.
and now, and we're a team's house, so we got to shove that platform into this shell, and now we try to get all the peanuts and the caramel into this thing that we've pre-baked, and you end up with this crumbly mess because it was never built from the direction that it needed to be built from, right? And so that was my analogy on a Snickers workplace. If you gave me a thin caramel shell and then I tried to put nougat in it, and then after I did maybe get the nougat in it, try to shove in all the peanuts and the caramel at the end, how successful and how beautiful of a candy bar is that going to be? It's going to be a mess. Um, and so I think it's a great way just to re-envision where you start, what you got to start with, and then how you build something in order for it to be valuable. And that's hard for some people to grasp, especially in a world of technical debt and sunk costs. We have a real estate portfolio, we have tools we use, but you have to think about it that way to set a North Star. And then as you make decisions to go from where you are today to where you want to go, then you can build purposefully towards that thing that is ideal, and not just continue to upgrade things that are no longer relevant or don't serve the business.
With the Snickers analogy and thinking about workplace and workplace design, one of the things that really stood out to me when in reading that was a conversation that I had previously with Kate. And so Kate actually works she works at HOK. And she's a
Okay.
principal designer at HOK. And her whole philosophy, her design focus is neuro inclusive design in the workplace. And our conversation was so fascinating, and it kind of made me think, like, if I were to like look at collaboration as a whole or technology as a whole, like at the root of it all, like what problem is the technology trying to serve? And the way she spoke about the differences in how each of us functions in a space, whether that's a space of work or a space of um like recreational activity, whatever that is, like all of our preferences are different, right? And then like even talking about like neurodiversity, it's like all we're all diverse, right? We're all
Yeah.
diverse, like when it comes to like our neural pathways, but there are certain individuals or certain neurotypes that really thrive in certain environments and that shrink in other environments.
Yep.
And I was never like, I was never diagnosed with like ADHD or any of those things, but I did some reading. And as I read, I started to say, you know what? I think I have that. I think I have that too. Well, yeah, there were so many different things, but like I often would think about when I go into an office and I look around and it's the open seating floor plan or something like that, or like there's the one kind of like war room area where everyone goes to share ideas, or like it's just like the layout was definitely designed for someone else, but it wasn't
Yeah.
designed for me. And then oftentimes it wasn't designed for my colleagues either, right? Because like you see people that
Yeah.
don't want to sit at their desk or they're like in some other place, and it kind of goes back to the point of like knowing your people, like knowing who you're hiring for. And she spoke about something that was really cool. And she's like, if you look at like engineering firms or architecture and design, like there is a certain type of person that gravitates towards that field.
Hmm.
And their neurotype is like you can usually figure out like, okay, this type of person is going to thrive in engineering, whether that's a person that may be on the spectrum or a person that just, does really well with numbers, outgoing, energetic people that want to be around people are likely going to be in sales or whatever. Like there's all these different neurotypes, right? But if companies actually knew when they go for that profile, like the ideal prospect of who they want to hire, if they actually knew what those people enjoyed and actually design spaces that attract those individuals, not only would they get high performing individuals like that star candidate that they're looking for, but they'll get those people into the office and more engaged, and people will do better work. And when you talk about a business case, a book that I read was like From Green to Gold, and that business case was all about sustainability. But
Hmm.
when you think about people and productivity, like 90% of a company's, you know, budget is spent on, their people, right? So it's like
Yeah.
it's interesting that people, companies don't pay more attention to kind of getting to know their people or getting to know what it is that their people are comfortable with, and then designing the spaces that they're ultimately going to work in with that in mind.
Yeah, I love HOK's work on this, and I've done 3 events, and I'm doing a 4th event with HOK and All Steel on their research on gather spaces, why people gather, and they've come up with kind of like 9 typical reasons that people gather in the workplace and how those environments should actually be designed differently based on the outcome of those things, right? So like
Right.
when you're creating a forum, where when you're formalizing a decision, when you're having a social hour, like what are those core components of design to get those kind of outputs out of a business? And they don't contend that every business needs all 9. They just contend that there are 9 of them and that your business probably needs a combination of several of them, depending on the outcomes and the people that you have working for you. So I love how that work has actually translated into behavioral kind of driven design, if that makes sense, outcome based design. I think there's a couple things there that you touched on that I think are important to think about too. Even within even within categories of people doing certain jobs that meet a profile, there's always going to be a range of kind of that still personality neurodiversity within that band. There's still going to be some range of that. So, one thing to really think about is that the thing that really helps in those situations is agency. Giving somebody choice is one of the things that allows people to do their best work, that they're not all contained to one environment, and that there are choices of places. Like if you do better doing deep work in a closed room, that you have the opportunity to go in a room or book an office, or if you do better work, in the work cafe, that there are tools there that you could actually use to access the things you need to do your business from there. Me personally, like when I'm doing deep work, I need a ton of noise and I need a lot of people around, and I will ignore them all while I'm doing it. But if you put me in a quiet room, I will stand up every 5 minutes and walk in a circle. It's just the way that I work. I can't
Right.
sit in a quiet room and do work. I can't. If
Right.
I need to do 8 hours of Excel work, I will do it better at Starbucks than I will ever do it better than in a quiet room. Right. So having agency is one thing that's really, really important within the space. The great part about technology today is that it gives us a lot of options,
Sure.
right? So no
Right.
longer is technology really a gatekeeper of any output, I don't think, because I think technology can do almost anything we need it to do right now. It's just a matter of defining what it is. That's the hardest part, right? So if you go back to architecture, there was a mid-century architect, Cedric Price, who said technology's the answer, but what is the question? And that's, I think, that's the era that we live in. The technology exists. So when you're thinking about work and agency and all those things, like, so, we should be using technologies that give us persistent workspace. So if somebody wants to work at a different time on a project, they can go into a board. They can work in this persistent workplace. They can add things to it. They can do work. It's not the same time everybody else is. And then when the meeting comes up, when you pull up that persistent workplace, everybody's work is represented, but they did it when their brain was ready to do the creative task or when their brain was ready to do the analytical task. And, expecting somebody to go from, meeting to meeting to meeting in an environment that we have today. I'm booked with you at 10 to do a podcast. At 1 o'clock today, I have to do a reconciliation of all the budget we want to spend on marketing. At 2 p.m. today, I have to talk to, one of my partners about a project that we're doing. And I have to move from, this mode of being social and talking about things that are very zoomed out from an AV perspective into really looking at analytics of budget and numbers, and then going back out into mentorship. Like, how do you do all that from the same chair every single day on the same screen
Right.
and switch gears at 10:01 to do that thing?
Right.
So the problem with most of the workplaces is, one, we have these tools and we're not using them in the way that we could be using them, right? Where you're using them in a very linear fashion. We've taken, and I write about this in my book, right? But we've taken these new tools and we've plugged them into our old mindset. And so we have this great board, but now we're only using that board in the hour that we're doing the meeting, when really we could be using that board all week. Because anybody can log into it from anywhere, and we don't have to just use it when we're in the room. We can log into it when we're at home, or when we're in the cafe, or when we're on the airplane, or whenever we're doing, when that impulse strikes us. The other thing is portability of content. So, living in this world of AV over IP now, with everything being on a network and our devices being endpoints on networks, nothing is contained to a specific space anymore.
Right.
So if I have 10 people that do better in a wide open, space, then I can move my content to an endpoint screen over in that space and move my meeting to that space just as easy as I can move it to a small contained conference room type space, right? So
Right.
the more that we design for flexibility, portability, agency, choice, those things mean that even when we have this shift in the bandwidth of people that are in the space, they're not stuck using something that was designed for someone that's not them, right?
Right.
They have this agency. I think the other thing that you're talking about, though, is this cultural piece of kind of like what you said earlier about, like, certain people may not be comfortable. We have these cultures. You were talking about this idea of a lead, like lead from the bottom, lead from the top, like, executives learning from new employees and new employees being mentored by executives. And I think that's extremely important in 21st century companies. I think you have to learn how those organizations work. Like you gave the story of, like, asking, why haven't we done it this way? And it might not even been that the executive was opposed to that question. They might have just been opposed to that being asked that question in public in front of other people.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to understand, like, what is the organization here? Is it kind of does it look top down? And if so, how do I get a bottom up approach? Maybe that's an individual conversation with somebody saying, hey, I was in this meeting. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to second guess you in front of the team, but I was just wondering, have we tried this before? And so sometimes approaching that, letting it be their idea that they can marinate on before they make a comment on it. Because what most people will do when faced with a question about their decision is they'll double down on their decision. They won't contemplate in public. Most people won't. It's one of the great videos that people are sharing online, and I love the video. It's where somebody asks Steve Jobs a really hard question. I don't know if you've seen this one, but the guy stands up and he asks, and he says, what lesson did you learn, or the woman, I think, what lesson did you learn at Apple that you're going to bring to Next, or something of that nature?
Sure.
And instead of talking, he sits there for 19 seconds quiet. And after that 19 seconds, he goes, that's a really good question. And I don't know if I learned this at Apple, but this is a lesson that I'm going to bring to this team, right? But the power of, the executives that are confident enough to sit in silence and not have an answer for 19 seconds, probably few and far between, right?
Sure.
Like, it takes some power to do that in front of the room and to say, you know what, there is a power in silence and there's a power in thinking. But you have to know what organization and what culture you're in. Again, that inertia of, like, what was built. And if you do want to make a shift, then you have to kind of be able to work within what's happening now to try to get that new outcome. The other thing I'll say on that, just on environment, et cetera, having those choices later in the book, and I'm not there yet, but I'm going to go into a lot of animal behavior. But, when you're in a predator-prey kind of relationship, like, predators like to observe from a high point of view with nothing at their back, right?
Mm.
So, it's safety, right? I get to observe the room, I get to choose when I participate or when I decide to hunt, and I have nothing sneaking up behind me that I need to worry about behind me. I can focus all my energy and all my attention on what's in front of me from my hidden viewpoint.
Mhm.
Having spaces like that for people who are more afraid to potentially contribute, and not putting them in the front row in a spotlight,
Yeah.
right, sometimes allows them to get their bearings, and then they choose when to come into the environment and participate, right?
Right.
Or things that are super stimulating, like some people get stimulated really easy. I work in experiential tech, and a lot of people talk about wow factor. Like they want, oh,
Yeah.
I want the people to come in the lobby and I want to hit them with this really high energy, song and this video and this really compelling movie trailer type sizzle reel. But if the person just got out of a busy cab in New York after fighting through an airport, maybe now's not the time to hit them with this really high energy scissor roll. They may be
Yeah.
exhausted. They may be overstimulated already. Maybe that's the time where you need to create a rest and digest moment. And we absorb detail better when we're in rest and digest than when we're in fight or flight. We get
Sure.
excited when we're in fight or flight. So we want that moment of of getting somebody really excited about something. But then we need to, before we try to give them detailed information, we have to transition them back into a rest and digest mode so they can remember high detail. Because we
Sure.
don't remember a lot of detail when we're in this excited mode because
Yeah.
we're just responding to stimuli. That's what fight or flight does. This thing flew at my head, I duck.
Mm.
I don't want to analyze what it is. If I get
Right.
hit in the face,
Right.
right? So that's just the way that our brain works kind of in that mode. And so I always think about how we're doing that in the workplace. Like, how are we creating these moments where we're looking to energize and excite? How are we creating these moments that are made to be transitions between states of thinking? How are we creating environments that encourage those different states of thinking? So, as I move from place to place in the office, the environment tilts me towards the mindset that I need to be in to accomplish the outcome of that space. And then, how do I then create that safety that you're talking about, that
Right.
psychological safety, those rest and digest modes, so that those analytical moments, those deep thinking moments can take place and you can really absorb like this really high detail. So, anyways, there's all this stuff going on all at once, right? And it,
Right.
it seems like an insurmountable task, which is why I really wanted to bring it down to the physics framework.
Sure.
Because if we can break it down into 4 rules that people have inertia, how do we recognize that? How do we codify it? Then how do we accelerate people towards the intended outcome without making them feel manipulated or using outdated performance metrics or KPIs or things like that? How do we recognize the fact that everything we do is going to have an equal and opposite reaction? Right. So if I tilt things towards this, it's going to tilt me away from something else. And so, do I need to create another space that actually tilts towards that? Or is that an okay thing that I'm going to lose? But we need to at least be able to know what those trade offs are and
Yeah.
how those things slide back and forth. When we slide that lever to the right, it slides another lever to the left. And are we okay with that compromise? And then the last piece of our spaces and our organizations having gravity. How are we attracting customers? How are we retaining our best employees? How are we attracting top talent? And how are we keeping people in orbit of our organization? Whether it's our mission, the community, the culture, whatever that happens to be, but that gravity that people have. And so I always figured if you could break it up into 4 things
Sure.
and kind of think about it in these very relatable ways, most of us have experienced, that in class, um, that it would make it a little easier than this
Yeah.
big, huge problem that it sounds like. And I'm hopeful that people will get some benefit out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten some benefit out of it. And, at its core, it just speaks to the simple fact, like many things when it comes to success, like there are no shortcuts, right? There are no shortcuts to this. And it's going to take some observation, moments of
Hmm.
stillness as an organization, and leaders being still and thinking and truly observing what is this wheel that's turning and why is it going in the direction that it's going, but like that's still it's hard to say. I mean, I guess it's not hard to say. It's easy to say, harder to do, probably, right? especially with all the things that are going on in an organization. You know, you got your external forces, you got all the stuff going on internally, some internal corporate beef. Who knows? It's like there's all these different things.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that moment of stillness for me, like even like at an individual level, I feel like I'm at this point in my career where I'm leaning more towards that moment of stillness where I'm like, okay, let me sit back and observe what's really taking place, right? Like what's really going on. I feel like there's, so many profound things that kind of come from that.
Well, I think we're all in, so I mean, we're all in this Neo moment, like in the Matrix, right? Where the world is different than we thought it was. There are more things within our control than we thought we could control within our environment. And in the beginning, we're getting beat up by Lawrence Fishburne, like, you know,
It's
like,
AI Lawrence Fishburne. I don't know.
exactly. Like, exactly. We're getting crushed, right? Like we're getting
Right.
crushed. We're falling off the building. We're resetting our game every 5 minutes because we're making a mistake. We're not able to control. We don't believe the things that we've said out loud yet.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and as we practice these things, in real time, which seems very, very difficult to do, eventually the environment slows down, right? So, he doesn't get any faster. He's confident in his knowledge of how the system works. And because he's confident in how the system works, he can see what's happening in real time. But to him, it looks slow,
Mm.
right? So, as leaders, I think we have that ability, right? Like we're going to go through this learning phase of like, these are the factors, these are the variables that we should be paying attention to. These are the markers that show us where those variables are at. These are the things that are going to help us navigate this new world that we've now been put into. And in the beginning, it's going to seem overwhelming, but at some point, as you become competent in it, it's all going to slow down and you can do a lot of these things in real time without losing momentum, without jeopardizing your business. And you can then affect, that outcome and make it whatever you want it to be. So it's an interesting point in time. I think it's really fun to live and work in this time. But I will also say that like really the point of what I was getting at is that people change slower than technology changes. And so today it's AI. Tomorrow it may be humanoid robots. Past that, it may be how we're living in a colony on a distant planet. And, whatever that happens to be, whatever that future happens to be, at the end of the day, it has to be executed by us. And if we don't understand how to work through change, then, the tenets of working through change are not going to change that much. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the change itself is going to be different, but the things we have to do as humans in order to learn new things, embrace new habits, change our mindsets, change our perspectives, develop new habits, achieve new outcomes. It doesn't matter what the change is; it happens all the time. We've been through this over and over and over again as a species for
Species.
millions of years, right? Like it just, so we just continue to do it, yeah. So, anyways, I think it's a persistent theme that we're going to be facing forever.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that if like I could take anything away from this whole conversation, the one major thing I would take away is AI is Lawrence Fishburne. That's no, no, but
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. AI is Lawrence Fishburne. But no, I think that you're right. But where you're hopeful, and I think where I'm hopeful, is that there is, I think, a unique platform for awareness today that was not the same in years past. I think there used to be a guarded circle of masterminds that would get together and have these discussions and dictate how the rest of the world received it. Now, you can form those masterminds and communities on your own and you can seek them out. I mean, it's a beautiful time to be a curious person, but it's also a time to be cautious as you are curious because the information is out there, But like I tell my daughters when they're Googling something, as if I told them, hey, you can't have matcha at 12 years old because it's bad for you, they're going to Google how matcha helps 12-year-olds, right? And they're going to
Yeah.
figure it out on their own. Like they're gonna look up the information that best benefits them. So it's important for us to, be cognizant of our biases and how we're trying to seek out the information. But the information is indeed out there. And one great place to find that information, ladies and gentlemen, is on Substack under Mark Coxon's book as he continues to write this thing over what the next 6 months. Is that
Yeah, I think I'm on like post 8 or something like that, and I think there's 28 or 32 posts total. So it'll take another 4 to 6 months to get it finished.
Yeah, well, you have a loyal subscriber in me. I'm gonna be paying attention to every
Appreciate it.
every session. Hey, it's like I said, it's a beautiful time to be curious, right? And
It is.
that information is definitely information that I hold on to and that I'm always just kind of trying to soak up as much as I can from different areas of the industry. And so with that, I think we're kind of coming up close on time. And Mark, for those folks who want to find you or who want to reach out to you and speak to you about anything, where can people find you? And where's the best place to get to know a little bit more about Mark Coxon?
Yeah, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, Mark Coxon, I'll probably be the first hit on LinkedIn. I'm there. Feel free to connect to me. I connect to lots of folks. Unless you're trying to sell me something, I'll probably accept your invitation. And probably even if you are, I will. And then when you DM me like the pitch, you probably won't get a response. But anyways, the connection there. The second place you could go is my personal website, markcoxon.com, just all one word, markcoxon.com. It's more about some of the speaking that I do, but you can find me there and find some information on me there. And then the third place I would say is always the company I work for. I work for AVI-SPL. I'm director of strategy and markets for XTG. So avispl.com/XTG is our homepage. We do a lot of experiential environments. We work on experiential workplace. We try to help customers tackle some of these modern day challenges with technology and great partners like you and your company, et cetera. So we love having these conversations. So if you actually have a business challenge and you want to like talk about how technology might be able to solve that, feel free to reach out to me there as well.
Right. And reach out to me first before you reach out to Mark to solve those challenges. No, just kidding.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, hey, Mark, it's been a pleasure, man. It's always great to talk to you. I can literally go on for hours and hours in conversations like these. But I appreciate you, appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I had a great time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to the Built Together podcast. We hope to see you again. Until then, have a nice day and enjoy the rest of your week.